Hello and welcome to this webinar today, Shooting Fish in a Barrel, all the data you need to know. I'm Javad Malik. So I work at KnowBe4. KnowBe4, if you haven't heard, is the world's most popular integrated security awareness training and simulated fishing platform. It was founded about 10 years ago. CEOs and the exec team mainly have worked in the cybersecurity industry for many years, and it's a rapidly growing organization. You can find out more if you're more interested on the website knowbe4.com. Myself, I've worked in the industry for about 20 years. I've worked in everything from, I started off in IT security operations, went on to consultancy and became an industry analyst, and then I moved on to the vendor side of the world as a security advocate. And in my spare time, I like to YouTube, podcast, and blog. So we're in this weird situation today that I saw this quote and I really liked it. It's "The office is now not safe for work." It made me chuckle. So we live in this time where most companies have spread out most of their employees to work remotely from home. Not the home office, but from home, and everyone's got some form of home office, whether that be a elaborate converted room or just a little corner under the stairs. And there are many pros and cons of remote working. I myself, I've actually been a home or remote worker for about 5-6 years now, and I do enjoy it. I think there are lots of pros. You get a lot done, you can focus on things, you can set your own schedule, but those kind of things are also like the negative, where you are forced to set your own schedule and get things done and be self-driven. I do miss the interaction of going into an office and meeting colleagues on a daily basis. I think there's something very different about that face-to-face interactions that you have at the water cooler or just at the office, or just having that ability to shout over, across the desk to someone and say, "Hey, where's so-and-so file?" or this, that, the other. It's just something very natural and organic about it compared to having to, even with the advent of instant messages or video chats, it just seems, those all seem quite disruptive to me. And I'm sure some of you might feel the same. It's just, someone sends you an IM or a text message or an email, and it just kind of disrupts your flow. And then you have to take time out, then you have to respond to it, and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, so it just works. I mean, for some people, it's a very good thing. For others, it's not. I think I've been working for such a long time that I don't think I could go back to an office full time, but I would like to go to an office like maybe a couple of days a week at least, just to see people, catch up, see all the things I'm missing. When we talk about working from home, there are a number of considerations, and security being top of mind for many. There are so many things. So people are told about passwords or authentication systems, setting up 2FA or tokens or what have you. VPN is normally part of that discussion. IT might mandate now that you use a VPN. There's there's identity management, malware. There's all these challenges, like how do you keep sensitive information confidential? And in the office, there's normally some semblance of a secure environment. You can print things off on the printer, you can leave them on your desk, and you can do certain things. But how do you counteract that when you're working in a home network and where you maybe print something, and then you have the whole element of children maybe, or family and friends. They want to just quickly jump on your machine and send an email or download the latest game or post something to social media under your account. Having those segregations in place is sometimes challenging, especially if you're using your own devices, if it's not a work issued device. And I think email security as well, it is one of those big things. Email and any form of messaging, I suppose it ties back to the previous point, whereby many people now will communicate via some form of text based. It's easier to just send someone an IM or to send them an email than it is to pick up the phone and call them or organize a video call for a lot of the day-to-day things. So what we see is that this now becomes another route where there can be miscommunication and there can be misinformation, be that intentional or unintentional. Sometimes it's hard to gauge the intent or the actual tone of voice behind an email. So that's something we need to really bear in mind. It's something that the bad guys are definitely bearing in mind. This is a chart pulled from our labs teams. And this is just in the first quarter of this year. You can see the COVID-19 phishing emails have just taken an almost vertical spike. You've gone from, none in the beginning of January to, a handful by the end, and nearly 100 sort of like by mid-March, end of March. So that's a really sharp rise. And that again is because, well, this isn't just about remote working. It's remote working under extreme circumstances. So I think if it was just a case that your organization was like, hey, let's try remote working, that would be a different issue because the mindset is different. But at the moment, people are working from home and they have maybe children off from school. They maybe have elderly parents they're caring for. Maybe they're worried about their own job security. They might be furloughed or something. Maybe they're having to take a pay cut. So there's all sorts of psychological issues at play here, and the criminals know that, and that's what they play on. So they'll use the common tactics to try and hook you in with an email. They'll say, "Oh, the government's released a new incentive. Click here and you see if you're eligible to some relief funding, or click here to see how many people have died in your area or infected in your area." And all these things are very very easy. They have very high success rate, and so that's why unfortunately we're going to see these continue to rise. Quarter one, these are some of the in the wild kind of phishing emails that we've seen. You see the top three are all COVID-19 related. Let's reschedule a meeting, some confidential information and all that kind of thing. And then like even number 4, you see work from home. Here's some new information about your VPN connection. And this is something that is expected in some ways. IT is probably communicating with you far more than they ever have in the past, and about things like VPNs or authentication tokens or what have you. So getting these kinds of emails, it's quite likely that someone will click on them. This chart, it shows basically the social media subjects that were the most popular in quarter one. And no surprises, LinkedIn dominates the chart. That's because, a lot of these goes to corporate email accounts. Therefore, they're not for individuals. And in the organization, that majority of people will be on LinkedIn compared to any of the other platforms, or at least maybe your work email will be registered with LinkedIn. That's far more likely than your work email being registered with Facebook or Twitter or something like that. And the most common ones are like, profile views. Click here to see who's viewed your profile, or add me to your network. But then we have other things as well. You see 10% was, hey, your password was successfully reset. And that's something that we see a lot of when someone's trying to target your cloud-based accounts. So Outlook, web, OWA, or some Amazon type based services, or Dropbox, or whatever you might be using. It'd be like, hey, your password's reset. So I didn't change that. So immediately you're kicked into action. Say, click here, let's see what happens. And general, these are some of the general email subjects that came out. 45%, the vast majority were all about password check. So it's like required immediately. And this is like that trigger again. It sort of like worries people. But at number 2, at 10%, you can see there's a CDC health alert network around coronavirus. And this is, again, this is something that I'm sure at the end of Q2 we'll see some corona or COVID-19 based subject overtaking or being very close to the password check required, most likely. So, okay, we get phishing emails come in. We get that now. That's not a surprise, but what's the big deal? And it is a big deal because while it may lack the sophistication that one might imagine, it's not someone coding away furiously on green text on a black background somewhere in a basement. It's actually, when you look at it, it seems like a very low risk kind of approach. You send an email to someone, say, click this link. It's an idiot sort. It's idiot proof, the attack. But over 90% of data breaches are a result of phishing, and what we found is that technical controls alone are not sufficient. Now, they're very good. They do reduce a lot. I think Gmail itself, they stop millions. I can't remember the exact figure. I just read it yesterday, but they stop millions of phishing emails every single day. And that's excluding what Microsoft see or what any of the other providers see. But even despite that, some emails will get through the filters. They'll get past the service provider, they'll get past your gateway filters, and they will land in your user's inbox. So technical controls are not on their own sufficient. And in the whole process, what we see is that a lot of times company might neglect the human factor or the human element as to how well they can help with the process of defending the organization. So what's the big deal? Well, the obligatory Verizon data breach report screenshot, where they're also verifying that phishing is by far the most popular attack tool. The main motivations are financial, and most of them come from external sources. Although there is like that mid curve of espionage and some internal sources of that as well, which is another concern. And what we see is that attackers will, if you look at the cyber kill chain popularized by Lockheed Martin, you can see the steps that it goes through. There's reconnaissance, there's weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, and then actions on objectives. What we see with something like, say, business email compromise, it really goes from steps 1, 2, 3, and then 7, because there is no malicious payload. It's literally an email that comes in that says, hey, I'm your CEO. Can you set up a new payment? And they're like, okay. And job done. There's no lateral movement needed. There's no exploitation. The email itself is the exploitation of the human at the keyboard on the other end. So you don't really need some technical skills. So that's why these types of things are so effective, because when we're looking at a cyber kill chain, we're trying to layer in technologies that come from 1 through to 7, and they're bypassing half of them by just going straight to the human. Anyway, so the question then comes up often is, well, we agree, we get it. Phishing is a big issue. There's lots of emails sent, and a lot of them get through and they cause a lot of damage. Okay, but what does that mean to me in any way, shape, or form? So if you're an organization, if you get 3 phishing emails a day, is that good? Is that bad? Does anyone else see those types of emails? And this is something that is quite often asked, and it's quite often unanswered. So we set about trying to answer this question and say, okay, what is the benchmark? What is the industry average? and what's the industry average of companies in your vertical, of your size, in your geography. I think that's useful. So if you're a small financial services institute based in Latvia, for example, so you're a small financial services, you have under 500 people. What is how would you compare to others within that sector? How many phishing emails should you be seeing? How many phishing emails should you expect your users to fall for? So we looked through our customer data sets, and we took 17,000 customers, which made up 4 million users and 9.5 million phishing emails. This was across 19 industries, and the majority were small businesses, like between under 250 employees. There's about 13,500 of those companies. There's just under 3,000 mid-size organizations, which we classify between 250 and 1,000. And then large organizations were over 1,000. And there were about 650 of those. To qualify in this data set, we needed those customers to be using the platform for a period of time and using the recommended best practices. As you know, with any tool or process or product, people might get it and they might not get around to it. So we didn't want to include, say, companies that had only had the product for 3 weeks, because it just wasn't enough data there to use it. So that's why we only took 17,000 of our customers, which is just under half of what our customer base is, I think, if my maths is right. So there were 3 phases of measurement. Phase 1 was, if you send out a phishing email to your employees where you haven't trained them at all previously, so you've not given them any security awareness training, you've not made them aware of anything, you've just sent out the phishing email. So that's phase 1. And then what that does is that gives you a benchmark. That benchmark is how many of your employees in total will click or liable to click on a phishing email. And that's something we call the phish prone percentage, which is the percentage of employees that are prone to click on an email. The second step after that is we repeat the phishing test, but after 90 days of training. So you have the initial data, and then you say, okay, now let's start training people. Let's give them awareness. Let's put up posters, have executives give messages. Let's provide them with some learning modules. So let's see how that changes after 90 days. And then phase 3 is, again, you repeat the test, but after 12 or more months of ongoing training and phishing on a regular basis. So the results were in, and the first thing I'd like to share is, which businesses or which verticals, industries are most at risk. And so if you look at the left column, small industries between 1 to 249, healthcare and pharmaceuticals were the most prone to click on a phishing email. So that 44.7 is like, you send out that first email as a benchmark and say, well, how many employees are prone to click on it? And nearly half of the employees there would click on it. So if there are 200 employees in that pharmaceutical company, then about 95 or whatever, 90s, about 90 of them will click on that phishing email. The second most risky one was education at 41.1%, and manufacturing came in slightly below it, about 0.2% below that. In medium, you had construction, nearly 50%. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals made another appearance at 49.2%, and business services were at 43.5%. And then in large industries, technology companies were well over 50%. They were like nearly 56%. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals, again, just about 50%. And manufacturing were 46.8%. So if you're in healthcare and pharmaceuticals, you're one of the worst offenders. Well, no, I say that, but that's according to the benchmark data. So, this is quite likely that they will fall for these things, but this is benchmark. But let's see what happens once you put in place your plan. So this is the data from phase 1. You can see that on average across all industries and across all industry sizes, the average initial baseline phishing security was 37.9%. That's the average. You can see that the mid-size, so it's basically the larger the company, the worse they'll perform. So small companies, that their initial phish plan percentage was 36.8%. Then it goes up to 37.5 for mid and 39.2 for large size enterprises. And what you can see along the chart is you can see all the industries broken out. So you can look down and see banking, business services, what have you. And then you can see how they compare in their small, medium and large. I mean, none of these figures are good off the bat. And, that's no real surprise. This is the initial baseline. So there's no training going in. There's no awareness. There's no nothing. You get hit by one of these phishing emails. It's not surprising that, over a third will click on it. But it just goes to show if you don't train them, that's kind of like what average you're going to be looking at. After phase 2, so this is after 90 days of training and awareness, you can see that number drops drastically down to 14.1%. So if we go back a slide, just to remind you, it was 37.9% in phase 1, 14.1% in phase 2. So that's 90 days. So within 3 months of implementing a security awareness and training program, you can bring that down. And this is like real world results. The most drastic reduction was seen in the 1,000+ organization, where technology organizations experienced a 39% decrease within 90 days. So, and that's after they had one of the highest initial baselines at 55.9%. So there's, these slides will be available for you afterwards. I encourage you to sit down and, see what your industry is and the size is, and go through each of these phases and see how it compares. Phase 3 is after a year. So initially it was 37.9%. Now it's 14.1% after 90 days. And after 12 months, it's drastically dropped again to under 5%. It's 4.7%. That is a huge difference. So you're going from over a third of your employees being susceptible to clicking on a phishing email to under 5%. That is a change. That is a game changer. So you can see, like, this is summarization of it. You can see that when you start off, your average is going to be about 37%. Within 3 months, you're going to hit 14%, and within 12 months, it's going to be under 5% if you follow the plan. The best improvements were across financial, government, construction, and healthcare. Their overall failure rate reduced by about 88% after 12 months, where you combine the security awareness training and the simulated phishing. Putting that into perspective, overall the average improvement was 87%, which is I don't think there are many even tech solutions out there that you can say you can implement it and you can improve something by 50% even, or 60 or 70 consistently. And this is something that's consistent across whichever industry you're in, whichever size of company you're in. and wherever you are in the world. So, I think the results and the numbers speak for themselves. In the report, we also split out by geographies. And so for the UK and Ireland, there was an average of 82.4% improvement. You can see the average initial baseline in the bottom chart, the baseline, the average across all sizes. It was slightly lower than the global average, which is good. So it started off at about 26.7%. After 90 days, that drops to 13.9%. And after 1 year, that again, it's 4.7%. So now that we've gone through those figures, which I'm sure you'll agree that these are quite telling. The question then arises, well, how do you build an effective plan? Obviously, you can come to us and we'll say, hey, you use our things and our technologies because we've invested a lot of time and effort into it. But I think even if you're looking for it yourself or you've got something in place already and you're thinking, well, does it work? Does it not work? How can I tell? And for that, I think we need to, especially if we come from a technology background, it's very easy to lean on technology. But I think one of the best ways to forget technology for a second and focus instead on the employee and get inside their mind, because that's exactly what the attackers do. When they send a phishing email, they're like using all these emotional laws. They're trying to get into the mind of their victim. They're trying to say, hey, does this person respond to greed? Okay, I'll pretend to be a prince in a foreign country and offer them 20 million if they help me get 1 billion out of the country. There's curiosity, things like, hey, there are all these underreported COVID-19 cases and deaths. Click here to find out more. The truth will shock you. There are things like, self-interest, urgency, fear, helpfulness. There's all these kinds of things that are there. So we need to focus on that as well. Now, before we actually delve a bit into that, it's important also, I really like the NCSC's, the National Cybersecurity Center. They have their defensive, defense in depth chart about defending against phishing. And I really like it because it combines the human element and the technology and your processes in there all together. So they've got 4 layers. So the first layer is make it difficult for your attackers to reach the user. So that's where all your technologies go. That's your ISP helping. You're putting your DMARC or put some gateway controls in place and all that kind of good stuff. So it's really, you try to reduce as much as possible the number of phishing emails that will actually make it into your user's inbox. Because if you can do that, then, well, fine, then we don't need everything else. But, ultimately things will slip through the net, especially if they're like, cleverly crafted, so they take time to, research the target. If there's no malicious payload within the email, those kinds of things are more likely to get through. Layer 2 is to help users identify and report suspected phishing emails. And this is where we completely operate. This is exactly what we do. And this is the layer that we focus on. It's about the humans. It's about the users, getting them to identify what a phishing email is, what it looks like, not clicking on it, and reporting it. Layer 3 is, well, if someone does click on something, which, even if you followed it all the way through 12 months, there's a 5% chance someone will, protect your organization from the effect of that phishing. Have some protection and controls in place, have some response controls in place, what have you. And layer 4 is to respond quickly to incidents. So layer 2 is where we focus, and that's what a few things I'm going to just touch upon now. Security awareness, we often use it as a synonym for secure behaviors, and they're not really the right thing, or they're not the same thing. One of my colleagues, he told me this quote, and I love it. It's that just because I'm aware, it doesn't mean I care. And I think if you think of it a bit like if you're driving down the road and you see a road sign that says speed limit 30 miles per hour. Okay, you're now aware that the speed limit is 30. But does that translate into you changing your driving patterns? And now, if it doesn't, then that's just information. You've just been made aware that the speed limit is 30, but it doesn't mean you necessarily care that the speed limit is 30. And that's where we sometimes go wrong as an industry in our security awareness training. We will tell people information, we'll give them information, and we say, well, we've made them aware. But, okay, so they're aware, but do they really care? Well, and that will only tell until they change their behaviors. Another quote that is one of my favorites, not from a colleague, it's from one of my favorite boxers though, Mike Tyson, and he says that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It's very easy to theorize. Well, if I go into the ring against Mike Tyson in his prime, all I have to do is duck under his hook and counter with a right cross, and I can win. And that's great in theory. That's great in training. But once you actually get hit, that's where the reality sets in. And this is what security awareness should be considered like. It's very easy to make people aware and say, hey, when this happens, this is what you do. But until it actually hits, you don't know how your people are going to react. And that's where the simulated phishing really comes into play. That if you send them simulated phishing, they get used to it. They see it. And simulated phishing isn't an attempt to catch people out. It isn't an attempt to make people feel bad. If that's what people walk away feeling with, then you're doing it wrong. If you send a phishing email and someone's feels embarrassed that they clicked on something as opposed to feeling educated, then there's an issue with how the security team is perceived and how it interacts within the company. Because the reality is the security team is that small compared to the size of the company. And what we want to move to is an integrated model where the security team is part of the company and it embeds that security culture within the organization. And we want to do it in a sustainable and effective manner. And that can't be done if the security team are the ones with sticks and the Department of No or all this other thing. It really needs to be a collaborative approach, and you can't be shaming your users. You can't be making them feel bad. You can't be, you're meant to be educating them. So the question that I often ask is, when you're putting together a security awareness plan is, hey, do you care more about what your people know or what do they do? And I think it's important to think about it. It's well, is it really important that they know exactly, why, or how something works or the dangers or everything? Well, you're just worried about what they do. So, for example, tailgating, just don't let anyone tailgate you into the office. Knowing it is one thing, but doing it is another. So let's make it easy for them to do. It's not possible to train on everything. And this is something we come into time and time again. If you want to change behavior, you need to start small. You need to focus only on a couple of behaviors at a time. If you try to focus on too many, it's just not going to be sustainable and it's going to be too much information. One of the techniques I really like is what they call nudges. You just nudge people in the right direction. So you don't force anything, you don't mandate anything, but you give them the choice to do the action that you want them to do freely. And the way you do that is by architecting choices in a way that makes it easy for them to do. So if you see the first photo, it's you got the two bins, the landfill and the recycling one. And you can see that when someone's going to come up and throw away their rubbish anyway, it takes only 2 seconds to split out the landfill from the recycling. And then there's that little nudge there, additional one with the photos on it, where the landfill looks really dirty and grimy and looks like, a toxic future. And the recycling one is a clean, pristine image of clean bottles against a white Apple-esque background. So that kind of nudges people to feel good about themselves. Well, I've done something good today. I split out my recycling material. The center one is for the gentleman, probably more. That's a urinal with a sticker of a fly in the middle. You might have to zoom in to see the fly, but there's a fly, and that's to help drunk people aim for the urinal and not the floor around it. The last example is a security one, and that's a password meter. And password meters work great because what you're saying here is, hey, your password, you can choose it. Technologically, they're not forcing you to choose a strong password, but they're saying, that's not great, or it might be a sad face. And the more better you make the password, the more characters you add, it'll go to not great, that's kind of good, okay, hey, fantastic, that's a brilliant password, or a smiley face, or what have you. And people really respond to that. They enjoy that validation or that feedback loop. So without mandating something, you've allowed people to choose a better decision for themselves. And a way to think about this is to think like a marketer. And we can learn a lot from marketing. And if you grew up in the 80s like I did, you may remember the clunk clink, even on the shortest trips, campaign about wearing a seatbelt in the car. And that was a really effective one because it was a simple message. It was just changing one behavior at the time. They weren't trying to teach people to, hey, put on your seatbelt and use your indicators and check your mirrors. It was just a very simple one message. Okay, let's just get people to put on their seatbelt, even on the shortest trips, all the time. And that message was reinforced. It was on the radio, it was on the TV, it was on billboards, it was across every medium you can think of. And after a while, after many years of consistently doing that, people now are at a point where, for the most part, they will just put on their seatbelt. They don't even think about it. Maybe they don't even know why they're putting on a seatbelt, but they know that's just something that they do. And this is what we mean by behavior change. And this is what we try to, or should be trying to achieve in security. So using that marketing model, it's useful to plan like a marketer and test like an attacker. So something like this is a good example where you have your phishing or simulated phishing or your automated testing on an ongoing basis, regular basis across the top. So that stays consistent. That's like an attacker. And then underneath it, on a week-to-week basis, you have your different touch points. So you have an executive maybe putting out a video, you have learning modules, you have newsletters, you have digital signage, you might have screensavers on the desktop, you have all sorts of things. You might have an intranet where people go to on a daily basis. But the idea is that you reinforce that message. So if you think about this as a clunk clink advert, you'll have the executive or the head of some boffin at TfL saying, put on your seatbelts, and then you have some learning built into your driving test, and then you have like emails sent to people, and then you have like billboards put up, and that just continually reinforces those messages. So pick a couple of behaviors you want people to be aware of that are relevant to your organization. So maybe it's something like COVID-19, or maybe it's something like a LinkedIn, hey, you have a new friend request, or people are viewing your profile. Just reinforce it time and time again, and eventually you will see behaviors change, and that behavior changes will get you down from 37% to under 5%. Measuring of success. I think there are three things you should look for when to see if your plan's working. Look at your fish prone percentage. If you haven't done a baseline, just try to get a baseline now. So figure out how many people are likely to click on a phishing email, and then after you've done some training, then measure it again after 90 days or 60 days, whatever works for you, and see has that fish prone percentage come down. Is the trend downward overall? If it's not, if it's staying the same or going up, then try to look into that. Maybe you've had lots of new hires who aren't aware of the process, or maybe something else has happened. Reporting of suspicious emails. How many users are actually reporting the emails? And I think that's a really, really good indicator. It's a really strong indicator that people are actually, not only are they not falling victim to it, but they're actively saying, hey, IT team, please look at this. Security team, please investigate this. I think I'm being conned here, whatever. And that then leads on to overall a culture change within the organization where people are generally more security conscious, and making the right security choices is the easy thing to do for employees. It's the easy thing for them to implement, and they are better equipped at making smarter security decisions for themselves. Last slide before I wrap up is one of the things we do. We have a large library of content that we have available to assist in training, and it caters for a lot of tastes. So there's like animated things, there's live action, there's short sort of minute long videos, there's like 45-minute videos, there's a whole gambit. There's some things that will be humorous than others, so whichever the taste appeals to your company, you'll find something there. And one of the things we've done is create this series called The Inside Man. And what this is, it's kind of like a Netflix series, and it actually looks and feels like a Netflix series when you watch it. It's episodic, and at the end of each short episode, there's a security message in there. So, hey, did you notice that scene where someone plugged in that USB when they shouldn't have? Well, that's a security learning. Don't do that. Or did you see that part where someone held the door open for someone that didn't have a badge? So all these sorts of things are in there, but it's actually a really, really enjoyable series. And it's the only time in my career that I've actually heard people say, well, we binge watched it in one sitting, or we can't wait till the next season comes out. I mean, there have been 2 seasons, but they're waiting for season 3. It's such a gripping thing, and it's such a unique way of delivering security awareness that people then they end up talking about it amongst themselves. Hey, did you see that character? Who's your favorite character? Or who's your least favorite character? Did you see that part? I would have done that differently. I would have done this differently. So if you ever get the chance, I do recommend go checking it out. It's made by a company called Twist and Shout, which we acquired last year. They're based in the UK. So another thing we try and do is create content that's relevant, or localized content, so it's relevant for that area. Because if you just try and translate something that's between us, created by the Americans, and you just try to translate it and ship it across the world, that doesn't always work. So we have different production facilities in different parts of the globe that'll create content that's specific for that language and understand the customs and the humor of that area. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. My contact details are here, so feel free to send me a phishing email. No, don't send me a phishing email, I'll just report you. Well, I hope I will. Yeah, feel free to reach out with any comments or questions. Get in touch, and I look forward to seeing and speaking to you soon. So thank you very much for your time.